Welcome to our exceptional TV for this week. My name is Judd Smith and I'm your host. I'm the creator of the Ultimate Difference Formula, founder of the Exceptional Leadership Academy. And I was going to be here with Gail Carter today, but she was in the last minute, she was unable to make it. But I was really looking forward to talking about looking at such a forward-looking topic as what she has been working on so very actively, and especially right around the time of the General Assembly at the United Nations, which has been happening now. And it's a topic of such enormous importance, and that's the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. And the particular ones that she's been looking at are climate, food, and well-being as we look forward to 2030, and how she is working with a number of people with youth and the arts. So I was really looking forward to speaking with her. But so given that she is not here with us today, what I do still want to do, and this is just off the top of my head, so my apologies for not really having gathered all of the information appropriate together, getting facts and figures and information. But what I would like to do is to just go over a little bit about the SDGs, these Sustainable Development Goals. What are they? Now, many of you may have some idea about how this came up at the United Nations. You'll have heard bits and pieces about all aspects of it. Those of you who are more active at the international level will definitely have heard of the SDGs. Those of you who maybe are still just focused in the U.S. context, for example, dealing with major issues, but the language of the UN may not have seeped into all of the different areas of your work. So SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. A little bit about the history first, and I'll try not to get too in-depth, but I just want to run through the 17 goals that there are under the SDGs. Now, they first came up when the millennium came around, and I still remember Y2K and all of the excitement around the UN, of course, as it was looking at that time, considering the possibilities of looking at its own charter again, possibly reformulating some aspects of itself. So why don't I just anyway, it was against that backdrop of change and the excitement of the new millennia and what was going to happen, even the simple things like who knew computers only had 2 digits for the 2000, you only had like 95, 98 instead of 1998, and people didn't know what was going to happen when things would roll over into and have it important to have 4 digits, 2000. But anyway, those days are way behind us now. But it was in 2000 that the United Nations came up and it had done its preparatory work a number of years before that, or the governments of the associated with the United Nations had done the preparatory work in various ways. But they had come up with what they called the Millennium Development Goals, and they were bold new goals, moonshot goals for the UN. And they were mostly around the topics of poverty, hunger, education, whatever. But at that time, they set a goal for 2015. Now, when we first set the goals for 2015, I was thinking, 2015, that's years away. Well, now that's 20 years behind us. We're already as the Sustainable Development Goals became mature in 2015, and there was progress that had been made in certain areas, and there was celebration of that and acknowledgement of that and whatever. And then the recognition that we needed to do another 15 years. And so now the next set of Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 to 2030 have been established. Now that was already 5 years ago. It's 2020. These were established in 2015. So already we're a third of the way through the next 15 years. I'm going to go, before I go quickly through the Sustainable Development Goals, what they are, all 17 of them, And I'll just give you a little bit of a synopsis of each one and bits and pieces that pertain, that as I've encountered them, just because I didn't do any prep to give you any more complex and historic and other information. But I just wanted to remind you a little bit about the UN. I know that, I mean, I've come across Americans that even say, well, the UN, it's in Washington, D.C., right? No, the United Nations is not in Washington, D.C. Most people don't know that it was what? San Francisco, 75 years ago this year, that the United Nations had its first meeting with, I think it was 56 founding members of the United Nations. And then, of course, the building had to be constructed, et cetera, and that was done in New York City. And so, yes, it's on First Avenue, between First Avenue and the East River. In New York City, between 42nd and about 49th Streets. So that is where the United Nations is. So, but what is the United Nations? Now, a lot of people don't understand. I'm just going to do a quick synopsis for you. It is the preeminent intergovernmental organization. In other words, it's a place, it's kind of like the preeminent association for governments to come and meet together and to collaborate. And the Charter of the UN was set up and established. You've got the Charter, and then you've got the organs of the United Nations, and each of those organs has its own rules of procedure, its own schedule, its own activities, their own mandates. But the UN as a whole today is made up of the Trusteeship Council, which you may or may not have heard of, is really kind of defunct now, but that was post-World War II, was an essential part of the process of taking over, the transitioning of countries that were being either handed back or handed over, or some countries fit into that area. And so there was this Trusteeship Council to oversee that process of reestablishment of certain countries as their own nation states. But that is basically defunct. Now, the remaining organs of the United Nations, of course, you've got the General Assembly, and people will have heard, and seen the speakers go in and make their General Assembly statements, or part of their quote-unquote general debate, which is a little bit less of a debate and more of a session of statements. But that's the General Assembly. That's where all of the members meet and deal with certain issues, come up with resolutions that pertain to all the members of the United Nations, etc., etc. Then, as most people know, that there is this thing called the Security Council, which is another organ of the United Nations, and that has 5 permanent members, the P5, and 10 temporary members that rotate every year, 2 years. So and a bit at a time. So you've got the Security Council there, and they deal with security issues, and it's structured a certain way, rules of procedure, different rules of procedure than what the General Assembly have. And oh, by the way, in the General Assembly, there's 193 member states. In there's the permanent 5, and then the 10 temporary in the Security Council. And then, in addition to the Security Council, I'm not going to go into the details of the Security Council. That could be another time, another whatever. But then you have the Economic and Social Council. And that was a major organ of the United Nations then, and deals with a lot of the stuff now. And so the Economic and Social Council deals with the economic issues and the social issues. Social issues have become less important for a little period of time, and now they're sort of coming back up again. There's this interesting swing, the concept of the importance of social issues. But nevertheless, under the Economic and Social Council, a lot of things are dealt with. And you've got a lot of subcommittees. You've got those dealing with crime and treaties. You've got those dealing with development, those dealing with food, those and all of those areas. Then you have the other organ, the 4th of the 5, Trusteeship Council, Security Council, General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, you've got the International Court of Justice, which is in The Hague, and that deals with mostly intergovernmental disagreements. So that's part of the reason why you may have heard of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. It was not, the ICJ was not made, the International Court of Justice was not structured. That was structured for governments to bring claims against one another. Well, when a citizen has a claim against one of their governmental leaders and wants to call them up, for example, for war crimes, that does not come to the ICJ. There is no place for that, which was why a group of civil society activists came together and helped initiate the whole process for the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which is a place, now that there has been agreements between the governments to do this, then this is a place where people can bring claims against war crimes against people within their own governments. Because in the UN, in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, a government that is running the government is not going to bring claims against itself for war crimes. It's just not going to happen. Anyway, so there you go. There you've got the core organs of the United Nations. Then, of course, you've got about another 30 UN organizations that are associated. And most of you will know organizations like UNICEF, UNESCO, World Food Program, refugees, the IMF, International Monetary Fund. You've got the International Meteorological Society, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. You've got the Postal Union. You've got many others and others that you won't have even heard of. But anyway, there are a total of 30 of these organizations, and each one is a huge organization of its own, with its own CEO or its own board and its own CIO and its own employees and funding issues, etc., etc. So, and then they all patch together into this very large organization called the United Nations. The important thing here I just wanted to mention is that this entity, this organization, the United Nations, does not control the governments. The governments are the preeminent bodies in this. The UN Secretary General is kind of like the big secretary of the United Nations. And the role of the Secretariat, that's another organ of the United Nations, the Secretariat, which is the thing that actually allows all of the work of the United Nations to actually happen. Anyway, so you forgot about that. And everybody knows the Secretary General, but are not always very clear about the roles, responsibilities, and authority and mandates of the Secretary General. But anyway, so his job is to make sure that everything is working for the governments the way they want it, according to the mandates and the structures, the rules of procedure, etc., of the various different organs. All of that is happening and running smoothly so that there can be this opportunity for member states to keep talking with one another on many of these issues. So let's go back to the issues that they were talking about in the year 2000, which were the Millennium Development Goals. And they mapped them out to 2015, and now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. So all of these discussions take place in various different parts of the United Nations. Different aspects of these 17 goals are taken up by different parts of the United Nations, are taken up by different parts of civil society, are taken up in various ways, and everybody kind of does this collage and mishmash of contribution to these things. But part of the challenge is coordinating and optimizing the contribution of everybody. And we can get to that very, very briefly as I will close this out, as I talk about something that I had recommended in a book that I wrote in 2016, United Nations Unlocked, and why it's so important for the tech community and the UN community. They need one another in incredibly important ways as we move forward into a digital 21st century. A challenging partnership, let me tell you, because neither the UN itself does not have the agility nor technical capacity of the tech community. The tech community is disparate and has very little, in the bigger picture, very little understanding of the reality of the global challenges that governments are endeavoring to face to their varying degrees, and take up certain levels of responsibility to varying degrees. And there's a whole slew of differences in that intergovernmental area. But the point is, these two groups that are so much a part of our future, our common future, technology and the evolution of our technology, and our political leaders so desperately need to work together much better than what they're already doing. They're a critical partnership. I would say a match made in heaven. But as you know, that heaven is not on earth. But anyway, that's a different question, different issue. I'll touch on that again at the end. But let me dive in really, really quickly into what are the SDGs. So, SDG number 1. Let me just... Yes, I've still got sound, so I've already recorded this once this morning and I didn't have the sound going. Okay, so here we go. Number 1 is no poverty. And this is where if I had actually done the preparation, if I had planned on doing this, I would have done some preparation. I would have had some more figures. But the figures, in a way, even if I tell you the approximate number of the numbers of people who are living in poverty, it is dismal that so many are. So many in my own area of the Bay Area are living in poverty. They do not have housing. They do not have adequate food. They do not have access to the health that they need. But the goal, one of the stated goals, is by 2030 that there is no poverty. And I think the reality is that this kind of a bold goal, it's possible. It's absolutely possible if we were to align our energies, our thinking, our willingness to work through our differences and challenges and figure out a way forward. But anyway, the goals, no poverty. And half the time when they talk about poverty, the numbers, again, I apologize I didn't do this, but I didn't get that data. You can easily Google it while you're listening. Just find out how many people are living below $1 a day or below $2 a day. And it is remarkable the numbers of people that are living below those lines. And that's not even the poverty line. Number 2, zero hunger. We know that already there is enough food to feed everybody in the face of the earth. It's just that we don't have the ways to distribute it or to make sure that it gets to the right places or the right people in the right ways. Again, this is a management issue. This is possible. This is not impossible. At the functional level, we could do it. Working at our relationships, how we're going to do it, who's going to get paid what, etc., etc., etc. I think this is where we really begin to start and see how we desperately need to have a new way of thinking about a lot of these things. I'll just leave it at that for now, because the main goal here is to get through our 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Zero hunger. Yes, it's possible already. The question is, how can we do that? Number 3, good health and well-being. Well, the reality of a human being is we're probably never going to have perfect health. But having access and to health care, having the education that we need to help us learn how to live our lives better and healthier, They are things that absolutely we could be working on. Will we ever get rid of illness and disease? Probably not for a long time, but absolutely we could be doing so much better than what we are. And again, so much of what we already have access to could be made much more accessible to so many more. It just depends on how we decide to manage our lives, our organizations, and our collective social organizations, our governments. Next one, quality education. There are people, there are people who, there are kids, children, who, because their life is still so meager, literally chopping the wood and carting the water that they need to live their lives, if there is any more wood left, just getting the water to where they need it. So many young people are needed to help just to survive. At least that's many times the reasons given, that they cannot even go to school. Now, of course, this leads us to number 5, gender equality. This is where girls are usually the ones who don't go to school because they need to be preparing the food and taking care of household duties, etc., etc. And we know that gender equality is not only over there, gender equality is right here in this community. It is in your organization. It is in my organization. It is in the largest corporations, the supposed remarkable organizations of our world. Right now, gender equality is still a big issue and will continue until we learn how to be better human beings. Clean water and sanitation. I was speaking with James, a contact of mine in Nigeria the other day, and his particular area where he lives is on a river that has, yes, it's used for irrigation. Yes, it is used for food as a water resource in that area of Abuja in Nigeria. Yes, it is used for the laundry. Yes, it is used as the drinking water. And yes, it is used as the way to get rid of sewage. Where I live, I turn on the tap water and I have clean running water. How much water do each of us need each day just to be healthy and stay hydrated? And if I had to cart that water every day and find some way to sanitize it, even when I didn't understand how to, or have the resources to do that, what would my day be like? Number 7, and yet we know that it's totally possible to have clean and sanitary water. It is totally possible to have sanitation and to take care of it and to recycle all of these things. We know that's totally possible. Number 7, affordable and clean energy. Well, we could go into all kinds of politics about this area, but I think it's just very, very simple to say at the heart of it all, yes, we need clean energy. We need to not be polluting. We need to not be making our earth sickly. It's not rocket science. When you have a young child, the love of your life, a new babe, are you going to you want to put them down in the dirtiest place that you can find? You want to give them food that you don't know whether it's healthy or poisoned? Yet everything human beings do, we make a mess making it, and that's normal. You can't even cook a meal without making a mess in the kitchen. But we clean it up. Yes, there's been times when we were totally on coal, and our industries have evolved through that and onto cleaner and cleaner and cleaner energies. And we can continue to do that. We need to continue doing that and completely get out of the energies that the forms of energy that are not clean, that horrendously pollute cities and the very places where people live. There is no reason today why we cannot have clean and affordable energy. We all need energy just to live. Yes, we need our forms of energy, not just electricity, but of heat or all of these things. But we need food. Food is the energy that we need as human beings. Okay, so moving on quickly. 8, decent work and economic growth. Even those who are internally displaced persons, and I was speaking with Muhammad Ali in Syria a couple of weeks ago. He graduated with English literature. He is a very eloquent, very educated, very fine young man. He is internally displaced in Syria. He does not live in the area under Assad. He does not live, he is not fighting with the rebels, and he is in this large area that is kind of like a no man's land in Syria, where many of the people are living. They don't have citizens' rights. They cannot travel. He can't go to Turkey. He can't get out of the country. He doesn't have the rights of a citizen. That only goes to those who are under Assad, the government. He's deeply grateful, as are all of the people who live in that community, for the food that is brought in, that is made available to them. But they are pained that they don't have a way to produce their own food, to sort out the legal issues of some of them who are there internally displaced. They do have access to their own land. Some of the land is not their own land, and the people whose land it is, who knows where they are. How can they organize in that space to be able to build up their own livelihoods? They so desperately want the dignity of being able to have their own food, grow their own food, cook their own food, create a society that, even if it's a small miniature society there, that can work and function, because decent work and the ability to improve people's situations is so fundamental to who we are as human beings. People want decent work and economic growth. They don't just want handouts and food on the table in which they have no say. As grateful as they are for those emergency rations that they still need. Industry innovation, and number 9, industry innovation and infrastructure. Well, today, what government can work? What society what city can be sustained without industry, without innovation, without infrastructure, without flowing water, running water, flowing electricity, food coming in and out of cities, food resources? You need the infrastructure. You need the energy infrastructure, the roads infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, all of the things that are needed to keep our cities and communities, most of which, and if you look at the reality of the world, and again, I don't have the numbers, but Google it really quickly, the majority of human beings alive today live in cities and communities, and these need to be, number 11, sustainable. I've jumped over number 10, reduced inequalities. These inequalities are not just the gender inequalities, but the inequalities of access, the inequalities of resources, the inequalities of education, the inequalities across the board, the financial inequalities. We need to shift these disparities and not just hand out money to everybody, but the access to resources and opportunities is so much what is needed, and these inequalities need to be reduced. Yes, the 1% that own the 95% or whatever exactly the numbers are. These need to be reduced. Moving on. I'll leave it at that. I won't opine. Number 12, responsible consumption and production. Well, that's all connected with also, it kind of connects with the cleaner, affordable energy, but this is not just the energy side. This is looking at production, waste, use, how we operate, even as human beings, our daily lives. We can be much more responsible. Just imagine in America, just imagine right here in the Bay Area, if in fact our trash was not picked up for a month. We would start and look at what we are trying to throw away a little bit differently. Growing up on a farm, we took care of a lot of things. We recycled. We had our food scraps that went to the chickens. When in the early days, I was on a dairy farm. The early days, we used to separate the milk. The skim milk would go to the pigs. So that's what I always associate skim milk with, feeding the pigs. And the cream would be sold off. Later on, we just sold the whole milk in vats of it and whatever else. But the point is, even there, the resources were all very carefully. The thing that we would recycle the bottles, we would recycle the cans. Even back in that day, the food scraps went so. We didn't have so many plastics. There weren't so much wrappings back in that day, but now there are, and we've got to find ways where how we consume our recycling of we don't just throw out the latest TV because it doesn't work anymore. There's got to be improved, and we've got to continue to work on and improve responsible consumption, and then of course recycling, etc., etc. And this comes now, next, number 13 is climate action. The goal is action, to take action on climate issues where and when we can. It doesn't mean that this is not an issue of the blame game at this stage. Dig down into it, and yes, you can get into that. But the climate requires action, and as we're doing things, we need to be aware of what we need, of what it is that we can do. And there are things that we can do. Whether we look at number 13, climate action, number 14, life below the water, that looks at the ocean, and number 15, life on land, it reminds me of the David Attenborough's latest documentary on life on this planet, a life on Earth. And I would highly recommend for anybody to go and watch that. Because it shows what has changed in a lifetime. And yet he didn't end up on a dour note, but rather he showed how, yes, with the right kind of opportunity and actions that we can take, things can turn around. Even the challenges that the tropical forests are having. And you can see the percentages of tropical forests that have gone over his lifetime, in our lifetimes, and how there can be a rebound when we give life a chance, when we give our earth a chance. And we do not exist without our earth, without climate playing a role, without the oceans playing a role. And I recommend, if anybody has a chance, to go dive the oceans while you can, while there are still corals. But to see and to experience another planet, so to speak, right on this planet, go dive. Put on a mask, put on a snorkel, take a breath, and go down and experience that world. And life on land, we know all about that, and I'll leave that as a summary for David Attenborough. Number 16 and number 17, the last two. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I guess I have worked for the last 20-some years, associated with the peace and justice issues, working with interreligious issues on peace and justice issues, working with the Alliance. Still the chair of the New York or UN headquarters chapter of the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, where we look at a lot of the issues, a lot of the justice issues, and they're enormous and they're broad. And the undermining of our justice institutions is all but criminal, and yet is sometimes the bulwark, the blue line, even at the local level. When you're looking at governments that are moving, countries that are moving out of war and into some semblance of civil life, one of the first and most essential groups of people are the police. And to have that perspective, to use police that use and abuse, absolutely, that's corruption. And that is one of the issues as to why we need strong institutions. We have to root out corruption. Peace, justice, deals with corruption issues, all of these things here. But that's number 16. These just give us the goals, the ways to focus a lot of our energies and to see how it all plays into this fabric of change at the global level. And number 17, an important one that just is more generic, but it says partnerships for the goals. And this is where, I guess, in my own version of that, I did, as mentioned, I wrote about it in United Nations Unlocked at the end of 2016. And this is where, again, one of the key partnerships, one of the pivotal partnerships that I see are really needed. And not, it's like kind of I think if you were to go back into the whole experience of matchmaking where people actually enter into a serious relationship, and yet even though they do not know much about one another, this is one of those moments for one of those kinds of relationships. Technologists and our global policymakers really need one another. The technology, the resources, the knowledge, the understanding is not inside the UN. But those entities which are impacting global policies, which are virtually shaping global policies by what they're doing because they can, a lot of the time, are the ones who urgently need to better understand the ramifications of what it is that they're doing. This key partnership is also, I believe, the key that can unlock the real role and the real contribution that both of these essential partners can make when they work together in our digital 21st century. The United Nations needs to be not scrambling with minimal digital capacities. It should have the best people, the best resources to help our meta-humanity. As the earth goes, so go we. And to the extent that we really need a collective, healthy, not hungry, not poor, gender equal, energized, highly functional working force, infrastructure, communities and cities. To the extent that we need all of these, we desperately need our global policymakers and our technology leaders and those who are building and innovating in the technology regions to really find new and effective ways to work together. And that could be the partnership that creates a platform for partnership that allows us to operate at the pace that we need in the digital 21st century. As COVID came in, so many things needed to change quickly. We don't have years. Yes, we need our governmental institutions absolutely need to have stability. They need to have reliable, dependable standards and norms. And they need to be able to adapt, not necessarily the standards, but the ways they're done, the ways they're implemented, the ways they're communicated. This kind of adaptability is still not yet a hallmark of the United Nations as a whole. it's struggling with it still. It's without, I'll leave it at that, just to say that this number 17, Partnership for the Goals, is a key one for us realizing all of these SDGs and to reach a peaceful and amazing, I mean, our world could just be so amazing as we move on into the 2030s, where the goals, the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals are targeting. We still have 10 years and a lot. We know how much can happen in 1 year. And most of the time we underestimate. We overestimate what can happen in a year and underestimate what can happen in 10. So let's think. Don't just think small, think big. Wrestle with the issues at the local level. Wrestle with the issues within our own lives, and make our contributions. And the SDGs are just one of those ways where we can find how whatever it is that we do in our lives, whether we're in health, even in alternative health, we are there and can see our role as contributing to number 3, good health and well-being, Sustainable Development Goal number 3. And as we do that in our communities and in our cities, we are also contributing to Sustainable Development Goal number 11. Those who are working with prison reform or working with social justice issues are working on 16, as well as probably gender equity, 8, decent work, perhaps climate action, who knows? But you can see where your contribution is being made to the larger goals of helping us take these strides forward in this time as a global community. Because increasingly, what happens in one country affects us all. What happens on planet Earth affects us all, increasingly at a shorter and shorter space of time. The half-life of actions. Yes, maybe it is getting shorter, but it is also, its impact is increasing and megaphoned because of today's technologies. Anyway, so I just wanted to run through those Sustainable Development Goals. I know that this is way not what Gail Carter was going to be talking about. I'm sorry she couldn't make it, but I would love to have her back again sometime to talk about how she is working with, especially in the New York, New Jersey region, with youth and the arts and the United Nations, and helping them make their impact in so many different ways. So again, this is Karen Judd Smith. I want to thank you for spending the time with me to hear about these SDGs, to consider, spending some time to understand the bigger global picture of what it is and where we are. And if you've got any questions, you want to know more about what it is that Exceptional TV is doing, or that if you've got questions about the Sustainable Development Goals, questions about the UN, or if in fact you are a social change leader and you want to know more about how to make a difference that really counts, how to structure your own organization to be to really be able to optimally, I would have to just say optimally operate in a way that you utilize all of your resources, your human resources, your financial, your access to other resources that you might not even be thinking about, and how to align those with the processes in your own organization to optimize these, because social change leaders are the ones who are often driven by passion, and it's all the more essential that you get your systems and programs in place so that you can operate effectively, and so that you can get out there, make the difference you want, make the impact that you want at the levels, whether it be local, national, or even international levels. I look forward to hearing from you. Don't forget to shoot me an email or a chat, a question in the chat, And I guess that's about it for this week. And next week, who do we have for us? Next week we have I have Rika Santham, and she's going to be speaking about highly sensitive persons. There may be more of them right in your own community than you knew. The following week, I'll be introducing Vanessa Russell, who is the founder and CEO of an organization here in the Bay Area dealing with stopping human trafficking and pushing for freedom for all. She has amazing stories and is doing remarkable work. And the following week, I believe I will have Yael Danieli, who is heading up a working group of the Alliance on domestic violence during COVID-19. And it's going to be a summit, and we'll be having people from the United Nations, people from all different walks of life, even people who are victims who will be speaking out during that time, during the summit, to look at the state of where we are and what it is that we need to be doing, what it is that we not just need to be doing, but what it is that we can be doing to take steps on domestic violence, especially during COVID, which is not yet going away. So that's what we've got coming up in the coming weeks. I look forward to seeing you all again. And with that, I would like to sign off. Thank you for joining me. See you next week. Thank you.